Hello, friend. Welcome back. I'm Susan Riley, your host for today's podcast. And so I'm excited to be back with you for yet another week. For the Artworks for Teachers podcast, we are looking at a variety of kind of information. So some weeks it's going to be a specific technique or a strategy that you can use in your classroom. Another week, it might be from an interview, like last week's interview with Meryl Goldberg. And we're also doing some book features because I know that all of us educators are ferocious readers. And I want to kind of talk back and forth with you a little bit about some of the books that I'm reading and the ones especially that I think we can take away some really great gold nuggets from. And so today's episode is going to be a book kind of review podcast. And so we're focusing on our book feature. And this book, that we're going to focus on this week is called The Power of One More from Ed Mylett. So I'm wondering if you have ever heard of Ed Mylett. Some of you, if you are into personal or professional development or leadership, may have heard of him. He's a serial entrepreneur, has had many different companies, very successful companies. And then since then, he has also become an author and also a powerful motivational speaker, specifically for leadership and professional development. And so specifically over the last couple of years, Ed Mylett has really come up on the scene in terms of a speaker that people are excited to hear from. And so I'm going to be really honest. Ed Mylett, when you look him up, he's like one of these guys who's got like all the bulging muscles, right? And you're like, oh no, not one of these guys again, right? That's like the first image that comes into my head. So when I first saw Ed, I was like, oh, another one of these guys who think they have it all worked out and that, their system is the best system and they go to the gym like 3 times a day, right? But here's the thing. When I went on vacation this summer, I downloaded the book, The Power of One More. Normally, I don't like audiobooks, if I'm really honest. I like to be able to have a book in my hand, whether it's in a Kindle format or like hardcover. I like to have it in my hand so that I can highlight and come back to things that I really want to reread. It's just how I like to read best. But I know that in my team, lots of people love audiobooks. And I thought, what better way to kind of deal with my flight than to just listen to a book, right? It's probably better for my mind than watching a movie on the flight anyway. And so I downloaded Ed's book, The Power of One More. And by the time I got through maybe 15 minutes of it, I knew that my impression of Ed was completely wrong. Completely wrong. Ed Mylett is one of the most genuine people I think that you're ever going to meet. Since then, I've kind of done some research on Ed and I've reached out to him and his team. And I mean, just delightful and truly want to make a difference. He, in the book, he kind of references his faith. As a Christian, he talks about that a little bit, but he doesn't necessarily use that as the pillar for the book. He just references that his faith is important to him without trying to overlay it on someone else, which I appreciate. And he also talks in this book about his very personal journey as from a child to an adult, a successful adult, with a parent who has an addiction. So his father was an alcoholic, and he talks about how he watched his father get sober and change and then stay sober for the remainder of his life, and what that taught him about the ability of people to change and how to enhance our leadership of folks who, when we're working with people who might be struggling a bit, how do we interact with them in a way that is kind, that honors where they are and still helps them to grow? And do we believe in the power of change? Do we really believe that people can change? These are the premises that are approached in the book, The Power of One More. So I encourage all of you, if you haven't read the book, to either pick it up or download the audio version like I did. Like I said, he looks like a big rough and tough kind of guy, but Ed's heart is pure gold. So I wanted to just kind of offer that as an introduction so that you don't necessarily turn away when you see a picture of Ed. So like I said about the power of one more, just as a brief overview, it is grounded in his experience with his dad. And he wrote this book after his dad passed away as a kind of way to honor what he learned from his dad throughout his life and how those lessons have impacted him over time. And as I was reading it, I was really moved by a lot of it. It was a personal journey for him, but also he takes that personal journey and he makes it really practical to anyone else. And so I don't know that you necessarily have to have experience with somebody who's an addict in your life like Ed did, or like I do, but certainly I think it also helps anyone who is in a leadership position, who is working with people who are different than who you are, right? And I think that's all of us. I think that applies to all of us. And so Ed has broken these lessons down into small chunks that we can all take away and learn something from in these lessons. And essentially, the big idea of the power of one more is that what would you do if you had one more, whatever it is, if you had one more day to live on this earth, what would you do? And how does that then reframe what you're doing when you get up every morning? If you had one more minute with the person that you loved most in this world who's no longer here, what would you have said? If you had one more chance to go back and change something that you really regret, what would you change? The idea of that there is always one more that we can be striving for. There's always one more moment, one more day, one more class, one more student, right? That we can work towards. And that gives us the motivation to really move forward, and also to think very carefully about our own priorities and what we really want from our lives. Which, as I'm getting older, it's something that I'm considering on a deeper level, I think. And I know that might resonate with some of you, especially who are veteran educators and you've been in this for a while and you're thinking like, is this still what I want to do? Or is this approach still the best approach that I'm working in, right? Maybe I want to try something different. I think this kind of a book helps you to get clarity on that. The one thing that I did find really interesting in this book is something that Ed calls the 6 basic needs. And I wanted to use this episode to really dive deep on this particular concept that he talks about in the book, as well as one other one that I think is going to be the best fit for us as educators, things that we could take away from this. So we're all really familiar with Maslow's hierarchy, right? So when I say Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have psychological needs at the bottom, followed by safety, then love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. And so I'm going to come back here, and I want to, for those of you who are watching me on video, I'm going to share my screen for just a minute so that you can see today's graphic. Now, remember, you are able to download this graphic by going over to artsintegration.com/artworks and clicking on today's episode. And it's right there for you. You can immediately download it. So this particular graphic is called Maslow plus Mylett, because I didn't think that these two concepts of the basic needs from Ed Mylett and Maslow's hierarchy of needs were competing with one another. I actually think that they work together. So when we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's in a pyramid shape, right? And so at the bottom, we have the physiological needs. So air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, those kinds of needs that we have, those are the base level needs, right? Then the next level up are safety needs. So personal safety, employment, resources, health, prosperity, property, those kinds of things. Following that is love and belonging. So we have friendship, intimacy, family, sense of connection. And then esteem, which is respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, and freedom, followed by self-actualization, which is the desire to become the most that one can be, right? So when we're working in professional development or personal development, we're really looking at self-actualization. So we know this as educators, right? Because we know Maslow before Bloom, right? That whole key of we have to make sure that we're addressing the physiological needs. Like if somebody's coming to school sleepy, they're not going to be able to learn today, right? And if they are not feeling safe in the building or at home, they're not in a place to absorb the information that we're trying to develop with them, right? So, as I said, I think Maslow, we all understand this hierarchy of needs. Now, when we're considering this, it's in that pyramid shape, right? And so the base level, you almost have to address each level one step at a time, right? So you can't really get to self-actualization until you've had your physiological safety, love and belonging and esteem needs met first, right? So here's where Mylett's understanding of 6 basic needs comes into play. So in his book, The Power of One, Ed Mylett describes these 6 basic needs as follows: certainty, which is providing security and safety; variety and uncertainty, which is giving people opportunities for change; significance, which is giving recognition whenever possible; love and connection, which is providing a cause that's bigger than one person. We're going to come back to that one for sure. Growth, which is to offer challenges that stretch people but aren't out of their reach. And then contribution, which is to share specific ways that people are helpful and are making a difference. So here's what's interesting to me about Mylett's 6 basic needs. It's not necessarily a pyramid. If you're watching this on video, you can see they're a stack of rings. If you're not watching this on video and you're listening to this on audio, I want you to imagine like a baby stack of rings where there's a large kind of donut ring at the bottom and then you can stack the rest of them on top, right? But essentially, they all could fit together. You could just make it 3D if you pull it all the way up. So they all work together, but they could also stand alone. This is where I think Maslow and Mylett diverge, and I think it's so interesting. Because if we look at Mylett's 6 basic needs, what he's identified as these 6 tenets, right, of things, especially for working with other people. So if you are an educational leader, this is what you would do in terms of motivating your staff or working with your staff. And if, of course, you're working in the classroom, how we're working with our students, right? So if we're working with our students, we're providing them with a sense of security and safety in the room. That's certainty. Like we know that every day when you walk into the room, there's going to be a bell ringer and you're going to sit down and do that one first, right? However that looks in your classroom, your routines, what they know to expect, that's really important for a lot of kids. It's also really important for a lot of staff members, right? We know that the first Wednesday of every month is going to be a staff PD day so that I can put that into my calendar. We know that every Friday is casual Friday and I get to wear my jeans, right? So the routines and things that we know, which provide us with a sense of certainty, is important. I know that I'm going to have my job tomorrow. That's important for people. And then the next step on his is variety and uncertainty. I'm not even going to call them steps. I'm going to call them rings because, again, they can collapse into each other. So they work in tandem, or they could be a step in and of itself. So providing variety or uncertainty. So opportunities for change. How many times have we been stuck in a rut? That routines, a certain amount of routines are important. But after a while, if we're just doing the same thing all the time, it gets boring. Right. And so when we need some things to change, we need every once in a while to be there, to have this little bit of variety, the spice of life, right? In order for people to feel as though they want to be there. In terms of significance, so giving recognition whenever possible. When Ed outlines this in The Power of One More, what he's talking about is the idea that we need to provide people with recognition when they've earned it. And also to remember that we can't take people for granted. So when you're looking at individuals in your building who are working really hard and you know that they're putting in the extra mile, recognize them in some way for that, and not in a way that would embarrass them. So if standing up in an assembly, like recognizing them that way is going to embarrass them, don't do that. But maybe just a quick note that you see them, you recognize in that. Doing the same thing with our students, right? That you recognize the hard work that they're putting in, or that they're trying so hard. Even if they're not scoring well on those tests, the effort that they're putting in is something that you recognize. That's significant for them. One of the ways which I love, and I want to do this with my team, don't tell them, is that the way that Ed does this with his staff is that he will actually write a note to, instead of writing a note to the individual themselves on his team, he will write a note to their children, or if they don't have children, to their spouse, or to somebody on their family that they connect with, their mom, their dad, whoever it is. He'll write a note about them to that other person, recognizing the work that they're putting in, or who they are as a human and how they went above and beyond, and just something that he appreciates about them. He will write that to a person who is significant to the team member. I think it's a beautiful way. Think about that if you're a leader, how you could write a simple note of recognition to your team member's spouse and just send it home to them on a card. Or if we're a teacher and we're working with students, send that note home to a parent, that it's not just a phone call, but actually a handwritten note. That I have noticed over the last couple of weeks that, Jill has been really working hard on this particular subject, and I'm so proud of the work that she's putting in. I just want you to know that. That goes above and beyond, but it's also something that allows people to feel significant, to feel seen. Then we have love and connection. So this is providing a cause that's bigger than one person. So oftentimes when we think about loving on our kids at school, right, sometimes there can be some backlash to that because they're not technically ours, even though we will claim them, right, as educators, right? But this idea of love and connection is that we are looking at how can we provide opportunities for those in our care, staff, kids, whoever they are, to experience being a part of something that is bigger than themselves, that's bigger than just the test, or that's bigger than just that lesson. It's more meaningful than that. So are we engaging in projects that impact other people, or provide some sort of significance for those kids or those staff members that they contributed to, right? These are when we're looking at maybe those couple of times a year projects where we're helping those in our community, providing that kind of connection for people. Then we move into growth. So offering challenges that stretch, but that aren't out of reach. This is when, we want to push those people who we know they could do so much better. They're on the verge of a breakthrough here if we just get them to stretch a little bit. Everybody, even if they say they don't, everybody wants to be challenged just a little bit. The key is to make sure that we're not going too far, right? And that's where we want to make sure that we're reevaluating our goals for people. But I think it's interesting, I taught elementary school for a long time, and when we'd have people come in for performances, they would say all the time, I can't believe that your students could do that quality of work. I mean, that's like middle school or high school level. And the thing is, it's just the bar that I set, right? I had faith that they could do it. Now, was I going to make my fifth graders, learn a madrigal, an a cappella? No, that's going to be too challenging, right? So there's the stretch, right? I know that that's too challenging, but can they do perhaps a piece in another language? Yeah, they totally can do that. So setting the bar at a height that's just right where they can't reach it, so that they can, when they get up there, they feel that achievement. And then finally, contribution. So sharing specific ways that people are helpful and are making a difference. So this kind of goes right along with that significance part and love and connection, being able to recognize those efforts that they're making, but also pointing out specifically, here's how you made a difference today. Here's what you have contributed to this particular effort, and I thank you for it. So according to Ed Mylett in the book, The Power of One More, the idea is that people want to see all 6 of these, right? And it doesn't need to all happen at the same time, but you also don't have to go in order either, right? So you don't necessarily have to provide significance for recognition before you're sharing contribution. You could do both simultaneously. And that's why I like his 6 needs. I think they stack together and work so well together. I also see the parallels from these 6 basic needs to the Maslow's pyramid, right? Clearly, the certainty of security and safety goes with physiological and safety needs, right? And love and belonging connects with love and connection and significance. So there's definitely some parallels here. I think they work in tandem with one another. And I think that was something that I wanted to share with all of you so that when you read the book, you can kind of start to make those connections for yourselves and see how that would maybe manifest itself in your own school or classroom. And so the other part that he talks about in this book that I found really helpful was the clarification between standards versus goals. So according to Ed, the standards predicate goals. So you got to have standards before you set a goal. And oftentimes when we're considering standards, right, when we're thinking about standards, we're thinking about educational standards, right? The benchmarks that we put into place that students are going to reach in order to be aware that they've hit mastery at something, right? That's a standard for us. But in this book, the way that Ed framed it, which I found really interesting, was the idea, a standard is what will you tolerate versus not tolerate. So if you set a goal, I'm going to totally throw this out there as something that's not something we would do as educators. But let's say our goal is to make $1 million this year on teacher pay teacher products. Okay. I'm not saying that is your goal, but I'm just putting it out there, just randomly, something totally random. If that's your goal, what are you going to tolerate this year that gets you to that goal versus what will you not tolerate? So will you not tolerate not making $1 million this year? Or will you tolerate making just $850? You see what I'm saying? So in his definition of standards, it's what will you tolerate versus not tolerate. And you could write a standard either way. So if your goal was, I'm going to make $1 million this year, I'm not going to tolerate anything less than $1 million this year. What does that then make you do in your goals, right? To set you up for success with that. Right? So does that mean that you're going to go run a bazillion sales on teacher pay teacher, or you're going to make sure that you have a huge email list, or you're going to work on marketing efforts this year? I'm just trying to pick this out randomly so that we can kind of get our heads around this idea of standards in a different kind of a way, right? What would you tolerate versus what you wouldn't tolerate? Let's do another example. Let's say you want to lose 50 pounds this year. Are you willing to tolerate losing 40 pounds? If you are you willing to tolerate losing 30? What's the lowest you're willing to tolerate losing this year? Because that's your real standard. That's an interesting way to think about it, right? Because if you are willing to tolerate losing 10 pounds this year versus the 50 you set out, then that's going to change how you approach your goal setting, right? So your goal setting then is simply mapping out how you're going to get to the standard that you've set. So if you have set a standard and for yourself and you're willing to tolerate losing just 10 pounds, then your goals are going to be a little different. Your goals might be that I'm going to take a walk 3 days a week, and I might hit the gym once a week for some weightlifting. Versus if I want to lose 50 pounds and I'm not willing to tolerate anything less than 50 pounds of weight loss this week, my goals are going to look a lot different. I'm going to do 45 minutes of cardio 5 days a week, and I'm going to add in 20 minutes of weightlifting 3 days a week, and I'm going to change my diet because I'm going to have to lower the calorie input. Do you see what I'm saying? So there's a difference in terms of standards of what we're willing to tolerate versus what we're not willing to tolerate that then shapes our goals for getting that there. Now, if we take that in context for education and what we're trying to do in education. Think about it as you're setting your professional goals this year. So let's take it back to what we do here at the Institute. If your goal is to implement 4 arts integration lessons this year, a lesson for every quarter. Okay, if that's what you're willing to tolerate, that's your standard, right? That's the minimum. Then what are our goals in order to get there? Well, my goal is to take one course to learn how to write a lesson where there's some standards alignment. And my other goal is to take a look at the lessons that are available in the accelerator and download those and try at least 2 of them as somebody who's already written one, right? So a couple of different kinds of goals. If your goal is to become an arts integration specialist this year, or if that's your standard and you are not going to tolerate anything less than becoming an arts integration specialist this year, that's your standard. Well, then your goals are going to be, I need to complete sprint 1 in the certification program by October 1st. And I need to complete sprint 2 by December 31st. And so you're setting yourself up for a very different kind of year with your goals, depending on what your standards are for yourself in your professional journey. I thought there were 2 very interesting things specifically for educators in that book that we could take and really run with. And I hope that you found those interesting as well. So that's it for me today. Again, the book is called The Power of One More. It's by Ed Mylett, and I'm going to put links to both Ed's book and his website onto the show notes today. You can find those over at artsintegration.com/artworks. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you found this episode helpful. Next week, we're back with some techniques and a strategy, and I think this one's going to help. We're going to dive into how to ask more interesting questions. So I'll see you next week. Bye for now.